Hi everyone, especially who interested in art, life and culture. In this video, I try to report from the artist talk in Yuan Gallery, Art Center in Bellevue, that Nick present his artwork here, and Julie was our host.
So, next question, you've alluded to, how does this, actually more than alluded to, how does this series fit into your prior work in terms of subject matter, style, palette, size? You've already noted your interest in kind of dendritic patterns, branching patterns.
Right.
And I'm very familiar with your immediate previous series, but not so much with things before that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've only been at this, doing art for about 8 years. And then I was in art school, atelier at Gage Academy of Art. And the atelier is different than taking classes. It's like going to work every day. And because it's 40 hours a week, 5 days a week, you're there all day. And every afternoon is life for room, so you're doing models, human form, and in the mornings you do your project. I lost track of your question.
Oh, well, how does this fit into your work?
Either work, yes.
You
Okay.
mentioned the landscape things that I'm familiar with.
Yeah, there was a landscapes prior to doing the series of these satellite photo landscapes of the Sahara Desert and things like that. I had done one series of paintings of a rock band. Their name was, these were human musicians in the act of making music. Each one was a portrait. And this band was called Thievery Corporation. They did your eclectic music. The name Thievery Corporation, I think, alludes to the fact that they borrow from all kinds of sources. And they had a video on YouTube from KXP, which is a local independent radio station here in Seattle, down in the Seattle Center. And I saw this and I said, wow, that's really cool. And I started taking pictures of the video. And then I said, I'd like to paint these. And I thought, why is I'm not allowed to do that? So I contacted this radio station, and they got me their lawyer, and they said, no, we don't care if you do that. You got to get, we own them, and you can make paintings, but you got to get permission from the band. And one of our DJs knows the band, so I did that, and I did this series. Actually, they were on display just before COVID hit. They had a gathering space. If you've ever been down to KXP, they have a little coffee shop, and you can go watch the DJ, and they have a stage for bands that come in. It's a big space, and they have a gallery where they have art. So I had the gallery for 2 months, I think. And I think that was, when I took my paintings down, then COVID had descended on the world. So that was the previous. And then prior to that was stuff for art school. I'd done portraits of, I did one commissioned portrait for a friend of mine. And then I didn't use the same method when I was doing portraits. I would use kind of like I would make up these grid patterns, like stars. I would use a photo, and I would superimpose a grid pattern, put the same grid pattern on the canvas, and then kind of sort of keep my orientation. I didn't use projection.
I will tell you what I do.
Oh, well, I'll say one thing, my palette has always been rather vivid.
Aha.
And that's been noted to me sometimes more or less kindly.
San Francisco in the 60s?
Well, that's where I think it came from. I think that was my influence. I showed you the same guy that did the hot rods was probably one of the main poster artists for the San Francisco ballroom scene back then. And I was really, as a kid, I loved these, as well as the music that came out. And the same artist who did the hot rods that I did when I was a teenager, he was doing these So I think my affinity for these vivid complementary colors that clash and that jump out and assault you is still there.
Did you ever meet this fellow?
No, he's too famous.
Okay.
Too obscure.
Okay.
No, I've never met him.
Okay. Then, well, in a minute, we're going to then stand up and take a walk and look at the paintings, and Nick is going to kind of present whatever he wants to present about them. And I've got two more questions. One is about the paintings. One is something that I'd like for you to address, if possible, as we walk through. Okay. Really, there are two things. One, the more important is we're just looking in general. What do you want a thoughtful viewer to be, do, learn, feel, walk away with from this work in general, not necessarily point to a particular one? But you know, I really love it when someone tells me that. What?
I love it when somebody tells me that they get lost and they love looking at the paintings pretty much from a more aesthetic point of view. There's a book I have at home I bought recently. I haven't read it yet, but it's by George Packer is the editor, and he brings together all this work of George Orwell, and it's called All Art is Propaganda. And I've always resisted art being propaganda myself. I've lived in Russia. Well, it's my foreign service stuff. I've lived a couple of times, and once when it was the Soviet Union, and then once when it was Russia. And I'm familiar with social realism and how that's been used, particularly in Russia, in that history. And there's some things about it. I mean, Gerhard Richter, who I mentioned, I mean, that's what he did. He came up through the social realism. And so that's not where I don't want people to take away that kind of message, a political message, necessarily. Although there's some environmental messages that inevitably, it's in a show like this, going to bring about, and I'm happy for that kind of stuff to be contemplated and to bring to mind. But mostly, I just want to engage people sensually, and I'm happy if that's as far as it goes. I'm happy to go with the other things too, to talk about them as stepping off points for discussion.
And then finally, where are you going from here?
Oh man. I have a few more of these I want to do, maybe another this many more.
Wow.
Before I go into some other realm. Maybe going to be more like this one idea, but I'll talk about that when we get to it. Shall we walk around?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
I think we're going to start over on the other side of the partition. And I'm just painting on the other side. So this one is entitled Ruby Spruce. Ruby Spruce. Ruby like a. And it's not a spruce. I realized after I'd already, and you know, it was already published, the name of it. I went, oh, it's not a spruce. It's a shore pine, and it's taken. Where I took the picture of this particular tree was on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. In the Bay Area, and these trees are all meaningful to my growing up because they've been around. I'm from the West Coast. These are all West Coast trees. No, I have no redwoods. I didn't paint a redwood, but I'd like to. And maybe this next group will be redwood. I got to go down there and get some photos. It's far away, but it's okay. I have a son who lives down there. So this is very California tree. This is the eucalyptus, or Tasmanian blue gum trees. That's what they call them down in Australia. And Tasmania is amazing. If you ever get a chance to go to Tasmania, it's so that most of those trees. When I went to Tasmania, we went down there for a week one time because I had some work in Canberra for about a month. And I remember the first two trips I went to Australia, I said, man, this is California. What is it? Is it the people are laid back? And I realized, no, it's because we have eucalyptus everywhere. And that's the way it is in Sydney and in Canberra. It's exactly like around Los Altos or Berkeley or those places. So these mean a lot to me, these trees. They're invasive species for the West Coast. They were brought in the 1850s to the Bay Area. They planted the seeds because in those days, the Bay Area, they didn't have forests. It was mostly grassy hills. And in San Francisco, they went through the gold rush and started making it into the city. And they built Golden Gate Park. And they started planting, among the other trees, eucalyptus was part of it. Stanford University, the most dense grove of eucalyptus was at UC Berkeley, the Berkeley campus. And so eventually they realized the federal government was encouraging planting these trees because they were supposed to be at the turn of the 20th century into a lumber shortage. So this was a solution. We'll plant all these eucalyptus trees. And that shortage never happened. And the trees ended up becoming a nuisance to a lot of people. A lot of people don't like them. They say the smell is the California smell, and I kind of get that. It's this menthol kind of smell. But they're planted all the way down to LA. There's a lot of them in Southern California. And I'm not sure how far north. I don't think they came up into the Pacific Northwest. It was red, but it was dark greens, a lot of blues. But I started painting, as I started painting this, I started going, you know what? Fire. So it became a kind of, well, one way to look at it, it's not necessarily fire, but it could be. In my mind, I was thinking, yeah, the hellscape of fire, because in the life cycle of trees, we have fire, and now it's every end of summer, it seems like, right? More and more. Matter of fact, 10 days ago, we were over in eastern Washington. We go over every August, just for a day, and get the peaches that grow over. We go over to Okanagan Valley, and there's this one fruit stand near Malott, Delap Orchards. It's one little fruit stand. They have the best peaches in the world. We get them, and then we drive home. We drove up through Twisp. There's the Methow Valley, and then you go through North Cascades Park on Highway 20. And they said when we were in Twisp, because we got sandwiches, Highway 20's closed. And we went, oh. We checked around and said, well, no, it is open, but there's a fire out there. And so we drove, and we got through, but there was no place to pull over because all of the turnouts, all the way over that pass, from Washington Pass down to New Halo, or the Seattle City Lighthouse, was equipment. And there are helicopters dumping, and there's the whole side of the mountain. And when we drove past the fire, was within about 100 feet, I think, of the road. But they were standing there, and they thought it was okay. Well, I don't know, that was it. I mean, we drove past, and then several hours later, they closed the road again. And I think it's been closed since. I think it'll be closed the rest of through winter. Anyway, so, apes I was mentioning on the Oregon coast near Tillamook. And these trees are incredible. Sitka spruce are one of the largest trees on the planet. They're really dark and kind of moody, tons of branches sticking out. Their bark becomes very dark as they age and gnarly, and they're really quite something to behold. They get into really strange configurations. And they love the coastline in Oregon and in Washington, Northwest, up into Alaska with the fog and the rain. The wood is extremely light and extremely strong. As a matter of fact, most of the aircraft in both World War I and World War II were built out of Sitka spruce because of those qualities. Therefore, the Sitka spruce are very sought after by the loggers, by the timber industry. And so I think it was a book I read a year ago that also keyed into my went into this series called the Golden Spruce, because there was this one mutated spruce up on an island north of Vancouver Island called Haida Gwaii. Haida Gwaii is almost as big as Vancouver Island, and its position in the Pacific Ocean, kind of like Vancouver Island is, protecting the mainland. And there was this spruce tree there, it was golden. And there's only one, and supposedly it was known about through a lot of the indigenous tribes, not only in Canada, but even down here in the Pacific Northwest, they revered this tree. And this book I read called The Golden Spruce, which was written a few years back, was about this one character who was a logger named Grant, I forget his last name, who was the logger's logger, and he, the main logging company up there was called McMillan Blodell. And that struck a note with me, because that is Blodell. Was that the same Blodell as Bainbridge Island? Blodell? And it is. And, but the Blodell from Bainbridge Island, he ended up selling his share, and he exited in 1999, I believe. He was no longer involved. And he actually was very much an environmentalist and advocating for something other than clear cutting. And that painting there is called Clear Cutting. I'll talk a little more about this. I probably should talk what I'm saying now more about that painting than this one. But anyway, these are sought after. Great book if you ever want to read it. It's just riveting. And it has to do, Blodell, was buried, I think, here in Seattle. He spent his last years in Seattle. But, and the company Blodell, McMillan Blodell, was bought out by Weyerhaeuser. So it's part of Weyerhaeuser. Okay, so on to this one. This is a Western red cedar. These are huge. And if you're up along Highway 101, south of Forks in the Olympic Peninsula, there's a couple of places where you see a little sign that will say giant cedar tree or something like that. And if you turn right, you go up some road that becomes a gravel road, and then it branches a few times. You're kind of not sure which branch to take and how far to go. It doesn't say exactly how far it is. If you're lucky, you'll find this or some others, and we did, and so I took some photos. And these are amazing. I mean, they go, they're over 200 feet. The giant sequoias, now as a kid, I remember going to Sequoia National Park and seeing those giant sequoias. They get up to 325 feet in a military compound. And the Monterey cypress are these also huge trees that are, there's only two places in the world where they came about. It was Pebble Beach and Point Lobos, both in Monterey. And what happened was is that they then replanted these trees up and down the coast. And actually, they planted some in Europe. They've got some that were planted in Sri Lanka. You ever been to Sri Lanka? They planted in a place called Norelia. Norelia is high up in the middle of the island. It's a high altitude, and it's very cold up there. So I guess that would fit. And then New Zealand, so you find them there. But those were brought later, because the only two places they originated was at Pebble Beach and Lobos. They had this flattening of their leaves, and I always loved the shape of them, the look of them, and they're also pretty tall. I mean, this is a grove in Monterey, and yeah, the colors are a little bit exaggerated. This one is a grove in Presidio, and what I did that was different here is I took the photo and then I stripped it down to just the bare minimum shapes of the trunks, and painted those in the dark blue, and then I switched it around so it's like an isomer or like the opposite, and then I superimposed the opposite on top of the dark, and that's what the light blue is. And it gives you this sort of chaotic, sort of thinking like Jackson Pollock, or else she has a Cicely Brown, who has exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art right now that I'd love to go to, but I don't think I'm gonna get there in time through December. So this, I felt myself being drawn into the world of Jackson Pollock and Cicely Brown as I was doing this kind of manipulation of these trees. And then finally, this is the most violent. And that's, I guess that's how it struck me, because we came again and, yeah, oh, sorry. I call this one Clear Cut. And there's another painting actually I have over on the other side that relates to this. Clear cutting, we all know, I mean, is this practice of taking part of the forest and just cutting down every single tree. And it's been practiced for ages. And it is, there's pros and cons on both sides of the argument. We all depend on wood to live. I mean, I'm not really advocating there shouldn't be logging, but there's different ways to do it. And clear cutting is pretty ugly and pretty traumatic. It's traumatic to the forest, it's traumatic to the environment. It's still practiced. It seems to be, particularly when they use it as a crop, an agricultural commodity, where you mow down areas and then you replant them, and then 30 years later you do it again and you repeat. But then you lose the diversity of the forest along with other things. So, and this particular tree is just, I guess, going to be left because it wasn't logged. I mean, something broke it right off. Or I call it, and also they use very simple colors. And, yeah.
Art as propaganda?
Yeah. Now this, maybe unintentionally, yeah.
And couldn't I see it as a nurse log, as a very
Yeah,
positive?
that's what I think, that's the positive. JW's talking about do you guys know what nurse log is? This is one of these particularly big cedar trees and cypress spruce, when they die, whether it's naturally or through other means.
And feel free to look at the rest of the gallery's exhibition. And we have a little book on the black table here if you'd like to write your email. We have a brand new exhibition coming up in September, and there'll be lots of events for that exhibition that will go through almost to the end of the year. So welcome you all to come back and enjoy more art. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching this video. Please don't forget to subscribe this channel for more artist talk and interview with artists, and feel free to come and visit this gallery, Yuan Gallery Art Center in Bellevue. This gallery continues until September. Please feel free to go and visit fabulous artwork there, and thank you again for Julia, the Dr. Julia, that being a fabulous hosting here. Thank you, Julia. I hope you have a wonderful show.